Your sole objective as an entrepreneur with your first product is to get to market and prove that customers like your product.
Are you ready? All right, let's go.
Manufacturing is sexy. Sounds crazy? Just wait. I'm Z Holly, host of The Art of Manufacturing. Your behind-the-scenes look at how people who make stuff are trying to make it in their industries. If you've ever wondered how to build a brand, a business, or just a better mousetrap, tune in and enjoy. For those of our fans based in the United States, happy Independence Day. On this 4th of July edition, I thought we should explore the practical issues of manufacturing in the USA. Where should I manufacture my product? It's an important question to ask yourself when you're launching a company, and most people assume they need to go to China. We've heard a lot about Made in America and retaining manufacturing jobs over the years, but I wondered, is locally made just a nice thing to talk about? What are we giving up when we decide to manufacture in the U.S.? Or are there times when it makes better business sense to make it here? So I invited 4 experts to come in and help answer my question, and some of their insights were surprising. I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute. The conversation was recorded live at the LA Cleantech Incubator at an event co-hosted by Make It in LA, ArtCenter College of Design, Supplyframe, Kickstarter, and Califia Farms. I was curious how to model your expenses, how to assess the risks, and how to consider the hidden costs of manufacturing overseas. We discuss the ethical and sustainability considerations, which aren't as simple as they seem. We talk about how to find your suppliers, and we hear some horror stories from the trenches. This episode is not meant as a sales pitch for local manufacturing. Every company needs to do what's right for their business. But as I suspected, the decision isn't as obvious as people make it out to be. We hear about that and a whole lot more on this week's episode of The Art of Manufacturing.
Thank you, Z. My name is Michael Corr. My formal education is in electrical engineering. And for close to the last 20 years, I've been manufacturing and designing lots of fun hardware products, anything from drones to IoT, wearables, telecom equipment, clean tech equipment. I've manufactured products both locally in the US, the Bay Area and LA, as well as overseas in China. And so I've got quite a range of experience in the pros and cons of both.
I'm Sean Scott, long history of manufacturing overseas with a brand called COMUNITY Made right here in the Arts District. We make shoes here in LA, and we use that to fuel a give back here in the community.
Hey, I'm Clarissa from Kickstarter. I handle all of Kickstarter's outreach for the West Coast for design and technology. So I bounce up and down the West Coast, going to Portland and LA and San Francisco and meeting creators who are building hardware products or design products of some sort. And we see a lot of creators sort of struggle with the challenges of manufacturing, whether or not they're doing it locally or abroad. So we started a program with Avnet and Dragon to help creators learn about manufacturing. And yeah, we could talk about that later for sure.
Cool. Hi, I'm Jaleh Factor. I have a garment factory here in LA. My background is I was an accountant for 10 years at a Big Four firm. My specialty was small business taxes and high net worth individuals. Wasn't the most thrilling job, so naturally after 10 years, it kind of made me nauseous, and I wanted an entirely different career path. I worked a lot with garment clients here in LA, a lot of manufacturing distribution, so I was able to see pretty intimately how they operate. It was something that always interested me, so I took a leap of faith and opened up a factory. Originally, I was doing import, mostly from China, some through northern Mexico. And eventually, through a windy road, I started buying one machine at a time, one employee at a time, and built our factory we have now. So we work with a blend of established brands and emerging brands. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So we have a really broad perspectives here. And what I'd like to do is start the conversation with each of you telling one story about that taught you a lesson about how to pick your manufacturing partners.
And we'll get into this later, but one of the things to think about when you work with other countries or other cultures is there are different ways of approaching business. And so I was working at a clean tech company. We're doing industrial lighting controls. And our product was designed to fit inside the light fixture. So it was a very narrow product form factor and had a very tight height restriction. And so one of our electrical components, we had to order a special version of it that was intentionally low profile, so it would fit in our product. It was a standard part, but just had to be special order with a special part number. And we were producing our products in China at the time, and somehow, unbeknownst to me, the procurement person at the factory ordered the standard version, so it was the taller part. When they went to assemble it, they realized the enclosure wouldn't fit. And so rather than talking to us and asking what to do or finding out what went wrong, they decided to innovate. And so we got a batch of about 10,000 units that had a sunroof cut out of the top of the enclosure, which is not acceptable. So one of the lessons learned of working with other cultures.
One of the things that often happens in working with an overseas manufacturer is that you work with an agent. The agent is a liaison between your business and the overseas business. They're on the ground there, and they can be vital for having a successful business. But choosing the agent is almost as difficult as finding a manufacturer. In the early days of Tom's, one of the first agents we went to was a friend of mine, somebody I trusted, we'd worked with for a while. He was happy to help us out with this fledgling business and turned us over to his Taiwanese partner in his business to take care of us. The Taiwanese partner had recently moved to China, was not happy about it, was not happy to do our business, and subsequently shoveled us off to the worst factory they could find. We spent a lot of time with him in a certain factory. They went off to another factory. And long story short was this like legendary disaster that I'd heard about happening to other people. Thought it was just a cautionary wives' tale, but sure enough, we got a first load of major production. Nordstrom had just come on as a key partner for the brand. I'm responsible for making sure they get their shoes high quality and on time. They arrived on time, but high quality was not even close. They were just a total disaster. Mismatched pairs, literally falling apart. I mean, it's the kind of thing you opened up a box of shoes and it was a total disaster. So the lesson there, choose your partners wisely.
Can I ask, is there, in shoes, would you spend time over there usually with the production partner, or in your case, you got an agent?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. I made the mistake of trusting somebody I'd worked with in the past, trusted them out of the gate. Like any new relationship, spend time over there making sure they understand your needs and you understand their limitations. They understand your shortcomings before you just hand the keys to the castle over to them. Yeah.
By the way, I like your bacon socks.
Who's gonna put
They're amazing.
Yeah, pretty great. I follow this company called Namiku pretty closely. Do you guys know what sous vide cooking is? You ever heard of sous vide cooking?
Describe it, though.
Yeah, it's like you throw some meat in a bag and you put that bag in some water at sort of a low temperature and you cook it to perfection so that it's like super delicious. And you could do this with veggies too. Anyway, so I'm addicted to this particular startup because of the food pictures. And I watched their journey. So they came out of the maker movement and built their product in maker spaces and was showing people how to build these products to actually have your own sous vide at home. And they joined HACS, which is an accelerator in Shenzhen, and learned how to actually like rapidly prototype their product in Shenzhen. And even though it was fast while they were there, they thought, man, we could do this faster but on our own. Like if we actually had our hands on the like factory manufacturing process. So they ended up coming back to the US and setting up their very own factory and training their own workers so that they could have more rapid design and test cycles. So that's like a good example of someone doing something a little bit quicker.
Awesome. Good story.
Okay, I have a lot, but I'll limit it to one. The first order that I did through China, I had a very close friend QC the entire order, and they did a fine job QCing it. The order arrived. It was for children's clothes for a retailer. it was my first time doing this, like flipping an order and, basically just like getting samples and taking it to a buyer. And then the whole thing was just like comedic to me. But I was like, you write a piece of paper and I buy tons of units. I bring it in and you pay me. Like, I was like, this is awesome. This is super easy. So I get all these boxes come in, freight company comes, they drop it. And I'm like, well, I should probably check the boxes and make sure this is fine and everything's legit. All the sizes match the boxes, colorways, samples match production. So as I'm doing that and I'm opening the boxes, I start smelling this like horrible toxic smell, just pure chemicals. It was coming from China. And I'm like, shifting through all this like kids' clothes, and it just like the off-gassing or whatever that you call it is just like nauseating. And I called a few friends and I'm like, is this normal? Like, can I ship this? Is this going to be okay? Like, this is going just the 6-12 month size. Is this going on somebody's kid? Is this going to be okay? And everyone's opinion was, yeah, that's what happens. And I was like, really? And they're like, yeah, India has a certain smell and China has a certain smell. And I was like, okay. So they were like, just repackage it. Like, just rebag it all, rebox it, and it'll be fine. Turn it in and it'll be fine. So I was just like, this does not settle well with me, and I never want to do this again. But it was a large order, so I was like, fine. We reboxed it, rebagged it, turned it in, no problems. And I was like, I'm never doing that again, especially on someone's kid.
So now you're doing all your manufacturing in LA, right? You have customers that come to you, and are there times when you say, you know what, it just makes sense for you to go overseas? How would you advise people to make that decision? Because there's a lot of things that go into that.
Yeah, I think that that it happens far and few now. It's constantly changing. The environment's constantly evolving. I think towards the beginning, there were certain situations like there was a gaming client that wanted to give away a free T-shirt at the casinos, and it's a promo product, so they wanted it at the lowest price possible, but their units were massive, 100,000, I think 100,000 every 3 weeks or something like that. It was some huge program. And that, I mean, when they want a shirt for $1.82, I couldn't compete. Like, that's not even possible. So that, you just, decline. But most of the work we do right now, no, I don't really get into... to be honest, I don't really get into the situation where I advise people to go overseas. And once we have a thorough conversation on what they need, what kinds of salaries they have in-house to manage the manufacturing process, here or overseas, we kind of like get to I don't gear it that way, but we usually get to the point where it's like, it absolutely doesn't make sense for you to do this overseas. The other example I can think of is like hand embroidery. So in India, obviously, they do great hand embroidery, and here we can do machine embroidery that's pretty competitive on price. But if it's something intricate that's based on labor hours, yeah, we're most likely aren't going to be able to compete. If it's, dresses and things like that don't have as many intricacies, then yeah, it makes sense to make it locally from what I've seen.
Anybody else have sort of thoughts on where that breaking point is? What are the different factors in the decision? Where does the overseas really make sense? Like, you wouldn't even bother to think about local. Are there situations like that?
So at my current company, Durolabs, and some previous companies, we've consulted with startups to help them work through this problem. And we get this a lot. It's very common for companies to come to us and just assume they have to go overseas. And it really isn't as dry cut as that, really. There really are many factors. And kind of what she was saying is a lot of it starts with the costs, right? And so your material costs and your labor costs are pretty much what make up the composition of your product. And I would argue, certainly anyone at this stage, your material costs are going to be the same wherever you're buying them from. Or excuse me, wherever you're manufacturing them from, because you're buying it from one source and they're shipping it to wherever you need. And they'll charge you normally about the same price. But really where it differentiates is in the labor rates, obviously. And so it really depends on the complexity of your product. So if there are a lot of subtleties that require manual attention to assemble or test, it probably makes sense to be in a cheaper labor rate region. If the product is very simple or can be assembled or tested very automated through machines, it's probably a wash, honestly. And so it's not cut and dry. It really depends on the complexity of your product. It could be one unit or it can be 1 million units, but there's not a clear line. Right? You have to look at it at multiple layers.
So I cut you off, Sean. You do everything locally, right? How did you make that decision?
Yeah. Michael actually gave a very good answer about the differentiation. It's the same. I mean, you're in a different industry, but it's the same in our industry. You know, it's a cost-benefit analysis of labor costs versus material costs. Are we ready to get into an ethical question?
Sure.
Okay. That's actually the reason I hesitated, because it's been on the top of my mind. Look, if your business is focused on a certain profit model, a certain volume model, then overseas makes sense. But do it with the understanding that this industry, that culture is built on suppressed labor costs, which it's easy to rationalize. And I did for a long time that, look, these people wouldn't have jobs if I wasn't there with some great companies I worked with, Nike or ASICS or Vans. If I wasn't there working hard, making a product that sold, these people wouldn't have jobs. And I felt pretty good about that. But unfortunately, I like reading American classics, and I read John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. Do you guys know this book? It's a beautiful book. But on top of that, it talks about the plight of the Okies, the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. They traveled west to California to find jobs with their families, uprooted. They had no other options except to go to California to find jobs. California, of course, like everybody else, was in the middle of the Great Depression, and there were lots of workers and not a lot of jobs, so they could pay whatever they wanted. And human nature and capitalist competition kind of led to abuse of that labor. And okay, things aren't that bleak in Asia because there's a lot of industry there. Thank you for being patient with this, but that's basically the conclusion I came to, is that it's part of a suppression of labor, and we need to get used to the fact that we need to pay more for fewer items and make them last longer. And that's honestly the conclusion why we're here in making shoes in LA.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add, for creators that I work with a lot, if your secret sauce isn't in the hardware, say it's in the software, and you don't want to be super hands-on with building your hardware, and you're okay with handing it off to a partner for manufacturing, then you don't have to be there in the factory every day to gather that knowledge. So that's another reason that overseas sort of makes sense, if it's going to be sort of hands-off and you don't need to be there every day on the line, making sure everything is going right.
So if I can add to that, actually. So another factor that I look at is not just the cost analysis, but which is reasonably easy to calculate, but there's a soft number that's a little harder to calculate, and that's based on the customer's experience. So kind of adding to what Clarissa's saying, if a customer comes to me and they've never manufactured before, they've never been inside a factory before, I don't care if the cost easily says go to China, I'm going to keep them here, because the cost of making a mistake can outweigh the cost you're saving in your actual production costs, and because of your inexperience, you're more likely to make that mistake. And so that's a little bit more of a soft gray area in how you decide, and that, usually through a series of pretty direct questions, I'll ask them what their experience is, or if they're capable of hiring an agent or some other advisor to handle it for them. But really, that would supersede anything else based on the production cost. Is if you don't know what you're doing, it doesn't matter if you're even getting the product for free, because if there's a chance you're not even get to market, who cares?
I'm going to add what Michael is saying, because I think there's something to be said for being agile, and producing locally gives you the ability to pivot in a way that your competitors cannot. And that's just such a asset right now in such a moving industry. Like, I'm in clothing, right? So if a blogger, you pay an influencer and they wear something and it sells out, it does really well, unexpectedly well. If you're working overseas, you can't refill that inventory, without tons of headache and cost. And if you have a factory down the street, hey guys, can you do me the favor of refilling it in 10 days? Okay, yeah, the price is going to be X, and we'll do it for you. You don't lose the attention of your customer. And I really think that sets you apart from other brands that are, just trapped in an overseas cycle. The other part, kind of like Michael was saying too, is cash flow. Domestically, it's known you can usually do lower minimums. So if you're not outlaying all of your cash in some huge order that's just a reach for you as a brand, you can sustain if it doesn't do well, or if it does well, either way it goes, just allows you to kind of survive. If you're meeting the arbitrary minimum of China or wherever, and that's a reach for you. It's just not a business move, I think, that makes sense, especially as you're emerging.
You're listening to The Art of Manufacturing. Follow our adventures on Instagram and Twitter @ArtOfMFG. And to chat with other like-minded creators, join the Art of Manufacturing Facebook group. We'll be right back after this break. The Art of Manufacturing podcast is a collaboration with Make It in LA, which is generously supported by organizations like the LA Cleantech Incubator. LACI has a really cool facility in the Arts District of downtown LA filled with energetic startups and nonprofits. They offer cleantech startups flexible office space, epic prototyping labs, and the #1 rated cleantech incubation program in the world. Learn more at makeitinla.org/LACI. We're speaking with 4 experts about how to decide whether to produce locally. I want to go off the reservation here a little bit. I want to ask the audience if you have questions, but not one at a time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have each one of you say what your question is, and then we'll keep talking, okay?
I guess, how does shipping come into this? It just doesn't make sense to me. Send the materials over there, have them worked on, and send them all the way back. It just...
Okay. You have the question?
Yeah. What about markets that doesn't really exist in the U.S. that you need to develop a new market? For tech, there is increasing market for production. Clothes, LA is great for that, but there's other markets that doesn't exist.
Who else has a question? Yep.
You brought up influencers with the fashion, so this, but for everybody. So how do you incorporate sort of the ethical decision into manufacturing? There's a little bit of that already, but more from maybe a personal standpoint. But in particular, the next question, sort of follow up to that, is discussing that with your customer of how they should consider that. Like, at what point do you not be in business if that's going to impede the bottom line?
Who else had a question?
Sort of similar to the earlier question, Los Angeles has a lot of great opportunities for fashion, but for my business in particular, I'm looking for like wood manufacturers, and it's like pulling teeth trying to get a quote. Alibaba, I can get one probably next day. Los Angeles, it's like next month.
Stay away from Alibaba.
All right, I think we have good questions. Let's riff a little bit off of that.
Speaking of risk, Alibaba is a huge risk. So,
all right, go for it. Let's do that.
Yeah, no, okay. Well, it's a good segue. I do get asked about Alibaba. They're a force to be reckoned with, and there's definitely part of the equation. And it may be getting better. I mean, in full disclosure, I wrote them off a while ago because I got burned, and it's just not a viable market. So I look at manufacturing as it's just a big problem of risk, and you're trying to mitigate risk, right? And whether it's picking suppliers, whether it's building redundancy into your product line, whatever it is, you have to build out the risk or identify the risk. And Alibaba today is this black hole. And you put out a quote or request for quote, and a dozen or so suppliers come back to you and they say, we've got the cheapest, we have your product. If you look closely, so first off, there's like, you can't find them. Right? There's no Google Maps. Their addresses don't show up. If you go to their website, it's very hard to actually find them. Right? So accountability is what I'm trying to get at. And I can speak firsthand experience. Like I was looking for one particular product, and I got 6 quotes back, let's say, and I opened an email from one of them, and there's a picture of the product, like a snapshot of it sitting on the floor of their office. I'm like, great, they've got it. Okay. I open the next quote. It's the same exact picture. So one of them's legit.
Maybe. 5
of them are not.
Maybe.
Right? So there's no accountability, and so you're adding risk. And so if you're prototyping, fine, right? If you know what you're getting into, you're like, I just need to get something quick and cheap. I just want to try it out. This prototype isn't leaving my office or my lab. Fine, right? You're eating your own dog food. You're going to bear the risk yourself. But if you're trying to go into full production of reasonable quantity and you're using a supplier that may or may not exist or may or may not be there tomorrow, or you have no recourse if they don't deliver, why do it? Again, you're just because something's cheap, you get what you pay for. Just don't. It's worth spending extra money when you're building a product and bringing it to production to build in the redundancy and the reliability.
I can talk about wood. So there's a creator that made this thing called Turn Touch, which is like a smart home remote. sort of thing. And he built them all by hand out of wood, but he had this awesome local partner called Wood Thumb in San Francisco. And they were kind of a surprise partner because they taught classes on like how to make a wood pen and things like that. And unbeknownst to a lot of people in San Francisco, they also would help you sort of fabricate your designs and things. So they manufactured maybe 10,000 of these items out of wood for his instructions. So I guess sort of tapping into the local like wood culture, you may find something unexpected.
Well, that brings up the question, I think, of does it ever make sense to start local for the lower volumes, and then you have dreams of millions, and then maybe you can go overseas? And what are the considerations for how you produce locally or how you prototype to make sure that it scales to production? Do you have any stories about, maybe it didn't go right?
I can give a good example of a large brand that was local, went overseas, and is now maybe coming back a little bit. So they started in Canada, very well-known brand, and they manufactured in Canada, built an entire community of great manufacturing for sportswear in Canada, great trims. All of their vendors were very local, beautiful product. And then for cost and for growth's sake, they moved a lot to Vietnam. So when they moved to Vietnam, they didn't have the man hours and the expertise under their belt to hit certain aspects of the design well. So one was like garment dye. They couldn't do the garment dye. It would never match, never was to spec. Their fabric comes from Taiwan, and now their model, up until just recently, their model was for some programs, sending it from Taiwan to Anaheim to get dyed, and then sending it to Vietnam to get sewed, and then sending it back to Canada for fulfillment. And I my accountant nature, I was like, let's look at the cost. Like, what is this? And so, my first conversation with people is usually back to a people-centered supply chain and the ethical conversations and my personal beliefs in why we should make things locally. But when I can't win at that conversation, I know that my platform's done, so let's get to the cost, and that's where people usually listen. So when we looked at the cost, I was like, you're paying 3 times what you would be paying me in California to make this. This is asinine. I guess that's an example of where an original thought goes so bad, and then you kind of have to regroup and go, yeah, I mean, I get it. When your volume is increasing, going overseas might make sense, but not always. And that's kind of where I sit down and I usually look at the numbers. I notice a lot of times that the brands are so segmented that they don't actually understand their own costs. So design team is looking at an FOB price, so from China X factory. They're not looking at complete pricing that's landed. So they don't understand that duty is really relevant to the materials. They don't understand what the shipping cost is. That seems like a sign of good margins if you don't have to pay attention to your full costing. But it's an area where I think better communication would help people understand why it's probably...
So help us break down, and anyone jump into with it. So what are some of these costs that are hidden that you may not think about?
Well, so certainly shipping, right? Shipping's a big factor. Air freight versus overseas. When you ship items by air, you pay for weight. When you ship it by sea, you pay for volume. So if your product consumes the same volumetric space but is has more weight or less weight, you might choose one over the other. Other things that people often ignore or don't really model properly are the startup costs, so what are called NREs, non-recurring expenses. So custom fixtures, custom tools, custom assembly, custom testing equipment. All those costs add up pretty quickly. If you're doing any type of custom plastic, so injection molding, molds, just a normal mold of a nominal product is, between $20,000 to $50,000. And if you're only making one, the very first piece of plastic that comes off that tool the plastic itself might have been 3 cents of plastic, but it costs you $50,000 and 3 cents to make, right? So people don't really model that correctly all the time. And they just ignore it. They're like, oh, this part cost me 3 cents. But they ignore all the maybe $300,000 worth of startup costs to get to that 3 cents.
And if you don't like your partner, can you translate any of that to the next partner? I mean, you get the mold, you get the dye.
Short answer, yes. Practicality depends how good of a negotiator you are.
Actually, I might use it to answer a couple of earlier questions, but I think among the hidden costs in our world in footwear and textiles is sometimes the infrastructure difference between doing stuff overseas and doing it here. China, as an example, has decades of time to establish an infrastructure, transportation of raw materials from one place to the other to make production easy. If you want a mesh on one day for one set of production and you want to use leather for the upper the next month, it's not difficult to find it. There are lots of options, and there's lots of transportation options to get it to you. You may find that's easy to do overseas, and so accounting for costs to find raw materials to simplify it. We can't find the foam midsole on our athletic shoes is not made in the USA, so we actually have to import that.
And what does that say about the choice of the material, maybe? Like, why do you think it's not made here?
We chased lower cost for our footwear, and the expertise that was here 50 years ago is not here anymore. It's all overseas. I'm going to keep segueing. The gentleman in the back in the gray sweater, you asked about, when do you decide maybe I can't do it if I want to do it here? Well, I mean, you're going to be the guy who has to make that decision, but there may be situations like with I can't find the raw materials to do it here. I'm going to have to import it. You're going to be the guy to draw the line about whether I'm comfortable with it. I mean, we had an option to just do our business and import everything from China. I mean, that would have made a lot of cost sense, but that was a line we weren't willing to cross. And if we went out of business doing it locally, well, then so be it. That was our dream. That was our mission. And I mean, I didn't give you an answer, but I hope it helps. Is you're the guy that can draw the line, only you, and then stick to it.
Hidden costs. I know of a surprise cost from a creator. So there's this creator, Eddie, from Durolabs, and they created a little camera that you can stick in a place and it'll take a selfie. A pretty simple product that he and his friends just wanted. And they were having them all manufactured overseas. And one day they get a call, and they had opened a random box, the partner that they had overseas, just as a spot check, and they found not a Poto camera, but an orange. Someone had been like, I want that camera, and took it and replaced it with an orange because it was the perfect size and weight. And so they had to stop production and open every package, and that was just a totally unforeseen delay, and they had to tell all their backers, but it was a fun story, so it didn't turn out so bad. Yeah.
So another place that you can go is reshorenow.org, I believe it is, and they have a total cost of ownership estimator, and they will help you step through each of the potential costs, including the risk to your intellectual property and the sort of the theft and quality control and all those things. And so it's definitely worth taking a look at that.
Do you want to repeat that name?
reshorenow.org. For many brands, local or LA made is an important part of the brand value, and I'm wondering how you balance that if you have experience. My guess is in hardware, not so much, whereas maybe in fashion, that's more valuable. Where have you seen that?
Well, I do have something related for hardware. So when I was working for the Cleantech company, we were all about a better world, right? So we got to practice what we preached. And so we made a conscious decision to use not just recyclable materials, but recycled materials in our product. And that comes with a cost. It really does. A really expensive cost. To get recycled and recyclable certified plastics, it's very expensive and it's very limited resources. And that was something we just chose as a company. It was important to us. And so we absorbed that cost and we lost some margin in our product, but it was something that was important, and we were able to brand it, and talk to our customers. And a lot of customers appreciated that, but it just felt hypocritical if we used, non-recyclable or recycled parts in our product when we're trying to make lighting more efficient.
In the hardware side, there is this great creator on the East Coast in Massachusetts that decided to figure out what manufacturing capabilities there were around, within 100 miles of where they lived. And they met each factory and each capability, and decided to build products around the local expertise or the local tools that they had access to. And they actually built an entire brand around that sort of strategy. So their brand was very uniquely tied to their local production. You know, they would go work with one factory and then hop to another one that's within 100 miles of their home and source all the raw materials from within 100 miles. So that's a good example of like a brand that was built on being local.
I don't know how many of you know Jessie Janae from Lumi. She talked about how, in general, and this speaks to the shipping question, because of the weight of the packaging, the corrugated boxes, et cetera, it does not make sense to source your supplies farther than 150 miles from where it's shipped from. So they have mapped out all the different resources so that they can, depending on where the product is shipping from, they will package from that location. And then there's a company, Bobrick, you may know. They do bathroom fixtures, et cetera. And some of their manufacturing is in other states and maybe overseas, but their bathroom stalls are definitely done domestically, and in fact in the valley, because it just does not make sense to be shipping these huge bathroom stalls, walls around across the ocean, not to mention the sustainability issue as well. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on sustainability. You mentioned, Michael, sustainability. Anybody else that has some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we make a lot of our fabrics for our programs in LA, and it's just nice to know that the full process is either under our roof or down the street. And then you can kind of vouch if your brand is based on sustainability, you have to be able to see it and understand it and ask all the questions you need to have the confidence to even sell it as sustainable, right? I think there's a lot of examples right now of great brands in the fashion space that's their first and foremost selling point. Yeah, I think that where our shopping culture is changing, consumers are demanding more than just a product. They like to understand the story behind it, which is great. And I hope that accelerates. I think we're seeing that fast fashion is kind of slowing down. And I guess the thing I see day to day is like, there's definitely a lot of brands that are interested in sustainable and ethical right now. The only confusing part that I see is that I don't think people understand how to confirm or have full assurance that your brand really is operating sustainably or ethically, and it's becoming like a token term. So it's a little disheartening, but as much as I possibly can, I push people to confirm. So, I mean, the best way that we can manufacture domestically is through transparency. So in my factory, it's not bad for people to do employee interviews. I find like that's the only way you're really going to know if people are being abused. There's a lot of articles in the LA Times about how abusive the garment industry is. I think in November, the average garment worker was making $6 an hour. My minimum wage operating here in downtown is $12 an hour. That's up $2 from $4 an hour in 2016. So it's really shocking. I think a lot of us don't realize that literally down the road, people are working in really abusive environment. So it's either payroll violation, health, safety code violations. We just don't really think that that's possible when it's local. And knowing that, and all the media sources that are trying to highlight this, I think the brands really have an obligation to push the envelope and ask all the questions that they need to. Like in my mind, it's not intrusive to ask me for payroll records. Like, yeah, I'm going to eradicate the social security numbers, but like, come on, if you're building a brand based on like, we use fair wages and we attest to this and that, I mean, you kind of have to, it's more than just like, do they have a payroll labor poster on the wall? Like that means absolutely nothing. Like even knowing the payroll or the safety regulations enough to be able to take a head count and know if there's enough bathrooms and if there's a women's and a men's bathroom separated. I feel like if you're investing so much in your brand image, you should be asking those questions.
How do the rest of you suggest people, where do you find your manufacturing partners, and how do you suggest people find manufacturing partners?
The best way to find a manufacturing partner, any partner, is a personal referral. If you know somebody who's in the business, has worked with them, that can give you a personal referral, that's the best. Otherwise, it's a crapshoot, and you better take your time to make sure they're okay.
personal referral is so important. And one of the things that when I was working as an entrepreneur in residence for Mayor Garcetti, that I was hearing a lot was that designers and creators were saying that, well, I can't get that information from anyone else. There wasn't a sense of community where people were willing to share that information. And I think that in different industries, there's different senses of community where you're like, no, this is all good for the community. I mean, we want our manufacturers to be successful, but until now, people have been very close to the vest. So that's one of the things that we're trying to change, is to create that sense of community.
One thing that we did in San Francisco is we started like a manufacturing tours meetup group, and we called up some factories that were local and said, hey, we have a group. Can we come take a tour? Yeah. And that was just a really good way to run through the factories and see what they were capable of. But it definitely doesn't beat a referral. That's like the gold standard. Yeah.
You want to add?
I think these are perfect answers. Like anything, referrals are always your best, whether it's a supplier, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a dating partner, whatever. Because someone who knows you knows what you need, and so they're likely to give you more honest, thumbs up or thumbs down. And it may not be a discredit to that supplier, but maybe they're just not a match for you. So a referral is often the best. But regardless of the quality of your referee, whoever gave you the referral, you still should audit. You should always audit. You should always go to the facility. If anything, it's just to double check the reference, but it also puts a face with the name, and you're starting to build a relationship with your supplier. Some other things I often advise people to think about is your manufacturer is literally like a marriage. You're going to be with them for a long time. You want to build a personal rapport with them. You don't want it to be transactional, where you just write a PO and then in a month you get a box of goods. You really want to build a relationship with them, and the best way to do that is just start by doing an audit.
Just like Jaleh said, when you need to do that, oh my God, I need to fill another order because it's going off the shelves. Like, you need to have that relationship, or else they're not going to do it for you.
The relationship part. I constantly say this, but my company's based on service and people. The product is secondary. Like, it's a given because I trust my people and I know the value of my team and I know how talented they are. The quality of the product is always going to be there. Like, I have stellar, incredible people that work for me, and I'm so grateful. But my relationship is first and foremost based on people and a service. So that said, the relationship that you have with all of your vendors is so important, from fabric, from the foam, whatever it is. It's just so important that you, really, really harvest that relationship, and then you're secure. If you go on Alibaba and you have a good order, you're an anomaly. That you were lucky. Go buy a lottery ticket. If it happens to you once, don't count on it happening again.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And I want to ask you more questions, but Lizzie, who has a burning question?
Okay, so I have two questions. One is for you, first of all. Is it a completely vertical factory? And also, I've noticed a lot of brands that are made in LA, the quality really lacks, where it sort of almost feels like it's made in China, but it says it's made in LA, and the price point is higher, but you're not actually getting the quality you should be getting. And also, how do you make consumers care about sustainability and really communicate that message to them instead of it just being something on a tag?
This is something I've spent a lot of time by river in my journal, thinking about. You can't guilt trip a customer into paying more because it's domestic or because it's made fairly. We will compel to some people, but I don't think that everyone's going to buy that argument. Good on you for being a brand that is doing that. And fortunately, I feel like you can't guilt trip a person into that. There's more people that care now. There's more people that are eating healthy, good quality food. The trend is going there. I think it's actually a motivator for us to try to do the same product with the values that we believe in. Does that make sense? I can't say because it's made in U.S., I'm going to charge instantly $2 more. There's science behind this. People won't pay $2 more.
Well, my idea is that making it locally doesn't necessarily mean it has to be more expensive. What I say about caring is not necessarily about guilt-tripping a consumer, but educating them.
Yeah. Education is fine. Yeah. I guess I'm just talking about price. You can't charge more just because it's made in the U.S. Your question about quality, we work with brands that do very basic goods that I don't think are quality, and then we work with brands that have an elevated quality where I look at it and I'm like, this is really good stuff, and I feel proud of it. A lot of that is driven by the brand and their fashion and technical sense. So I always say, don't make me think, just tell me what to do. Any factory relationship, you really just want them to follow what your vision is. So it's on you guys to kind of express to us, this is every incredible like detailed tech packs. This is every detail of what I want to make, what my design is. If you're relying on the factory to pick a colorway, if you're not providing a Pantone reference or something like that, I think it's just like there's points of breakdown where it's not going to turn out that nice. If you're very thorough and you want a quality product, as long as you communicate that, it should happen. And then vouch for the factory, make sure that they have brands that you work with are similar to what you're trying to produce.
I guess, yeah, along the same lines, at least I have a perception, or came in with the perception, that made in LA or made in the US in general is for sort of low volume, high value, almost like luxury items. So is that generally true, or how much more are you paying to make it locally? And then how much more are customers willing to pay?
I think you're feeding into the misconception. It really depends on the product. Depends on the type of product, depends on the complexity of the product, depends on the local specialty. Regions have their specialties in skills or in components. The Made in USA branding effort that has been going on for a while kind of depicts this image of like steel and hardy worker type products, which is great, and there's some truth to that, but I don't think it's so narrow. I think you can get good and bad products across anything. This might be a little too meta, but like the entire world was made up of people, and there's good people and there's bad people. There's good companies or bad companies. It's not necessarily specific to a region. You can get high quality of one thing in any region of the world, and you can get ripped off of something else in every region of the world. So I don't know if there's a blanket answer that Made in the USA is better or worse, or specific to a production volume or even a type of product.
Yeah, it's different for every product. I think it's good to investigate all of your options locally and abroad, just in case locally ends up being the better approach, or abroad. And who knows, the conventional wisdom may tell you, you make product X, that's in space Y, you should go to China or something like that. But conventional wisdom may not know that the landscape has changed in the US or something like that. And you could be like pioneering that process locally and have an edge. So I think Jessie Janae would say, like, if anyone tells you this is the right way to do something, you should just like stop listening and go investigate for yourself.
To restate, I think what they just said from a different point of view is, we've talked a lot about the problems with finding the right partner and the problems of manufacturing in China. But you do find the right partner, and you find people that you trust. You can find a great quality product in China at a very good price. Even take into account the shipping and the import duties and all that. Yeah, I mean, it's not only possible. I mean, the U.S. has been thriving on that for a while, and China's been thriving on that. We've talked a lot about the benefits of USA and USA manufacturing and some of the drawbacks of overseas manufacturing. It goes the other way as well. I mean, there's, like they were just talking, there's lots of drawbacks here. For me, it's finding skilled labor, and there are lots of benefits to doing stuff overseas.
Throughout tonight's talk, I've heard only discussions around mass-produced products. What happens if there's
You're saying more artisanal kind of products?
Sure, an organization where perhaps the consumer market is only within LA County, and it really could make a difference producing it in the county, in a particular city, and really zoning the scale down into a much smaller area.
Do any of you have any thoughts on that?
I love that. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. There are a lot of makers, artisanal makers, having success here locally. And the key is engage the local people. However you do it, have them over to your house, have them to your space, have them help you make things, hire their neighbors to help you make things, and engage the community. If the customer base is large enough to sustain the business, you've got a great opportunity to do something really special and have your customers actually be a part of your life.
We've gone all over the map here, everything from ethics and sustainability to the cost. We dove into that, cultural differences, all sorts of things. I was wondering if each one of you has one little takeaway or piece of advice to give everyone.
Here's my parting advice. I'm going to assume that most of you are just getting started with the product, or you're getting into what's called the NPI, New Product Introduction. As I mentioned earlier, I look at manufacturing as a risk mitigation problem. Your sole objective as an entrepreneur with your first product is to get to market and prove that customers like your product. your first priority is not to be profitable. It's to get your product to market. If you try and cut corners because you're trying to save money or you think there's a cheaper or better or faster way to do something, but it adds risk, a risk of your product not getting to market either because it just completely fails, or maybe your product is seasonal and you have to be on shelves by October in order to hit the Christmas market, and if you miss that, you don't have enough money to last another year. It's not worth the risk, right? Spend the extra money to de-risk the problem to guarantee your product gets to market and your customers give you the response that you're looking for. And whatever you pick now, it doesn't have to be a permanent solution. So kind of feeding back to what Z was asking, it's perfectly appropriate to start locally because you're de-risking it. And then financially, once you reach some success or some stability, move it overseas. And there's plenty of suppliers who actually have that built into their business model where they help you start locally and they have either formal relationships or partnerships with suppliers overseas that they can just literally transfer all the files and the tools over there and you start benefiting from the cheaper labor. So de-risk the problem.
Cool. All right, Sean.
I'm not going to talk about maybe the most important thing because we talked about it a lot, but I think I'll talk about a trend that I think is healthy to be aware of it. And I agree that maybe fast fashion is fading a little bit, but what isn't fading is, as a business person, is being closer to market, being closer to your customer and closer to the time you deliver. I think the old model of building a lot of old overseas model of building a lot of inventory, bring it over on a boat and 90 days before it sells through, I think that's shifted, and it's much easier now, both overseas but especially locally, to build more to what your customer needs now. So you can check with your customer with a sample on social media or your website and find out what they want and what they like, build the product to meet that need. And I would say, but I'll leave you guys with that.
I couldn't agree more at Kickstarter. I think the most important thing from my experience working with creators is when you're building a product for the first time, you have to learn as much as you can. And being as hands-on as you can really help so that you can learn the process and then iterate on that process and have the edge over competition, or even understand the levers that you need to pull in order to make your brand the best that it can be. So the closer you can be to your manufacturing process, the more you're going to learn. And whether or not you do that locally or go abroad, just make sure that you're sort of in the thick of it.
I guess I would say mine's not so much about making it locally overseas. I think we got it. We killed that conversation. Mine's more about entrepreneurship in general. I feel like this group is probably looking to start their own brand or start their own company. And my personal experience moving from something so far opposite from manufacturing into manufacturing showed me that if you have a thought and you're really committed to it, and you're going to put in the hours to dedicate yourself to it, and you see an avenue for it to be successful, to just hunker down, put all the hours and effort into it. Maybe don't share your concept with everyone, because I think the tendency is for people to, they want to protect you, and maybe they vocalize some fears and it might mess with your vibe and your energy. I think just really hunker down. If you believe in what you're doing and you believe in your mission, your brand, or whatever it is that you're starting, find your partners, build your relationships, do the hard work, and usually it'll come back to you.
Jaleh, Clarissa, Sean, Michael, amazing panel. I think the three most interesting lessons I learned today were, first, and maybe most importantly, you can't generalize about where it's cheaper to manufacture your product. Ignore any common wisdom and roll up your sleeves to do some detailed financial modeling. You should break down the costs into material and labor and consider whether anything can be automated to save on the labor piece. Work out the non-recurring expenses too, like molds, prototypes, and custom testing equipment. And when you cost out overseas manufacturing, don't forget hidden costs like shipping and duties, plus the risks like intellectual property theft and quality control. We also learned not to underestimate the overhead of managing production in a country that's a 12-hour flight away and in a different time zone and speaks a different language. You'll need someone on the ground to make sure things are going right. You can go to reshorenow.org to help costing this out. Check the show notes for that and other useful links. Also, how do you find your partners? Personal referrals are best. But look at the other brands they work with and check that the type of products and quality are aligned with what you want them to make. Even if you get a referral, make sure you visit the company in person. Check the working conditions, ask for payroll records, make sure they're registered with the state. Don't assume just because it's local, it's higher quality or ethical. And finally, it's no secret I'm a huge fan of local manufacturing. I believe strong local manufacturing ecosystems are more resilient, sustainable, and innovative. But we're facing something called the tyranny of small decisions. We would all be better off if we could all manufacture locally, but we don't. It's kind of like eating organic. Sure, it's good for the environment if everyone eats organic foods, but until the cost-benefit works out for the individual consumers, it doesn't take off. Unless the government steps in. Over the last several decades, countries like China have been diligently investing in their infrastructure and their supplier networks, and some say entering into unfair trading practices. And so sometimes it's still hard to compete with them on cost. Ultimately, you need to do what you feel is right and is best for your business. For many of you, it's a purely financial decision. But there are other reasons to make locally, and for some of you, sustainability, being more innovative, having a strong relationship with your factories, being able to iterate, or just supporting the local economy is an important value. In which case, make sure to make it part of your storytelling. Time to wrap it up for the Art of Manufacturing. Tune in next Thursday for a new episode and another sneak peek at how entrepreneurs are making it. For show notes, visit www.artofmfg.com. Follow our adventures on Instagram and Twitter at artofmfg. And to chat with other like-minded creators, join the Art of Manufacturing Facebook group. Never miss an episode. Subscribe on iTunes or Spotify or your favorite player. And if you like the show, do us a favor and leave us a review. Or send us a message with your thoughts and ideas to feedback@artofmfg.com. This podcast is produced by At Large and Dangerous in collaboration with Make It in LA and other partners. Visit makeitinla.org/connect to sign up for local LA events and news. A big shout out to Peter Brandenburg, the producer and audio engineer. Thanks for listening to The Art of Manufacturing. I'm Z Holly, and remember, don't just make it, make it.